Hello again, everybody. It's time for another one of those discussion things with Jacob, the guy. It's been a while, so hopefully I'm not terribly out of practice with how to blather on about a video game that I recently beat. This time we got a doozy, a real doozer right here. One of perhaps considered one of the greatest games of all time. And I've played it for the first time and I want to talk about my experience with it. That is Chrono Trigger. The classic Square JRPG that everyone who's ever played it seems to really love. Did I love it? Well, I guess you're just gonna have to find out. One thing that I've learned pretty early on with Chrono Trigger is that there does not seem to be a definitive official way to play Chrono Trigger. Every version that you can officially get does seem to have its pros and cons if you don't want to do the other naughty thing to play this game. You know the one I mean. You know, and wink wink, snudge snudge, emulation snudge. Hopefully I dropped a hint there. So you got the original Super Nintendo version, which is probably the most pure way of playing it. It's the original, the one that most people remember. So great. It's like $250. So odds are you don't have that game, and you're not going to be able to afford it, like me. Then, there is the PlayStation version, which comes in the Final Fantasy Chronicles compilation, a 2-disc compilation that comes with Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy IV. It's got some really nice, snazzy-looking anime cutscenes, and it's the version I played. And it's also, secondhand, easily the most affordable option you've got. I got mine for like $15. You can find copies of this pretty cheap anywhere you look. But what's the downside of it? It's the version I played. I'm sure that anybody who's familiar with it cringes at the idea that that's the first way I experienced this bona fide classic. It's got load times, and a lot of them. In terms of affordability, this is probably the most accessible option, but in terms of actually playing the game, from what I could tell, it might actually be the worst way, because I was warned about it. I was warned about the load times of the PlayStation version, and yeah, they did not disappoint. Get a 5-second load to open a menu, a 5-second load to close the menu, 5-second load to open up the party switch menu, a 5-second load to close the party switch menu, a 5-second load to start a battle, a 5-second load to end the battle, a 5-second load if there's some kind of significant cutscene happening, a 5-second load to enter an area, thankfully not a room. Like, changing rooms usually just takes a second or two, but if you're entering like a dungeon from the overworld, you're gonna be loading. It's ridiculous. It's so much. Like, just the 5-second load, like I literally 5 full seconds to just start a battle. Like, you run into the enemy, they get into position, and then it loads for 5 whole seconds. And then you beat the enemy, and then it loads for another 5 whole seconds to get back to the game. It's ridiculous. I cannot recommend, if you're going to play Chrono Trigger, like, if it's your only option and you don't want to emulate it, it gets the job done. It's still Chrono Trigger, but God, those load times are so bad. Like, I waited until after I beat the game to watch some gameplay on the Super Nintendo version because I didn't want to notice the load times even more, and it felt like I had just, like, downed a fucking gallon of Monster or something. It was so fast looking. It looked so much more efficient. So yeah, I haven't even talked about the game yet, and there I go, ranting a little bit. It's not the game's fault, though. Anyway, other versions. You got the DS version, which has a new translation, which not everyone seems to like, but, you know, it's portable, and it seems a bit more affordable. Like, every copy I see usually goes between, like, $80 and $120, so that's still a shitload of money, but it's less than $250, so there's that. And then there's the mobile and Steam versions, which are the most accessible, and they're also, I believe, about $20. Let me check Steam, actually. All right, on Steam, it's $15. I'm sure the mobile version is about the same because Square Enix really likes to put really expensive games on mobile for some reason. But it's got this really hideous UI, and it doesn't look good, and the text is hard to read. So I'm not, even though it is the most accessible version, I'm not sure that is the best version either. I don't know why there's no, like, just straight up port of Chrono Trigger, like, anywhere. It's so bizarre. So yeah, there is no, like, 100% best way to play Chrono Trigger, except to emulate the Super Nintendo version, I guess. But I would never, you know, support that, you know. Look at this shelf. Look at this shelf. Does this look like the shelf of a man who uses emulators often? No, this is the shelf of an idiot. So, yeah, there you go. So anyway, I'm 5 minutes into this video. It's time to talk about the actual game. So, Chrono Trigger, it's, of course, a Super Nintendo JRPG. It's got a surprisingly simple plot. It was very easy to follow. So you play as a nameable character. As always, I named them all the party members, their default names. You play as Chrono. You meet your party members, your friends. You meet this girl named Marley, and then your childhood friend named Luca, who is an inventor, and she invents this, like, teleportation device that you can use to teleport short distances, and it's really cool until something goes wrong. Marley goes into the machine, it reacts weird to this pendant she's wearing, and then then it opens a rift in the space-time continuum, and you hop in to chase her, and you travel back in time 400 years to the medieval days. Well, even more medieval than you already are. The present in this game is 1000 AD, so then you travel back to the year 600. So time travel is a big part of the game. I somehow didn't know that until, like, shortly before I started playing the game. I had very little to go on about this game, other than it was really good. You travel to a whole bunch of different, like 4 or 5 different points in history. You end up going to the distant future, and it's all shitty and awful. And if you find out that in the year 1999, I guess all those Y2K things were true, except instead of the computers dying, there's this giant sea urchin monster that pops out of the ground, named Lavos, and destroys the whole world and plunges the Earth into thousands of years of darkness. And you and your friends make the decision to stop it. Like, hey, this sucks. Fucking let's stop this from happening. And that's mostly the plot. You see a few, like, small side plots here and there, including one that feels pretty significant, where you have to stop the evil wizard Magus from summoning Lavos himself to kind of bring about the end of the world a bit sooner than 1999. But that large plot, that's mostly it. It's very easy to follow, and I'm very surprised at that. Like, I always, like, when it comes to classic JRPGs, I always imagine some level of convolution, some level of poor translation, some level of difficulty understanding what's going on. I did not feel that way in Chrono Trigger. It was the story keeps itself very simple, and that goes double for the time travel mechanic. The best part, the reason that Chrono Trigger can make time travel work when so many other properties don't, is because it doesn't think too hard about it. It doesn't worry too much about butterfly effects. It doesn't worry about, you know, every little action you're taking, how it can affect what happens in the future. It doesn't think about that, and honestly, that's for the better, even if it doesn't always make sense. It's really the best way you can go about it without making things convoluted, confusing, and unfun to follow. Like, you travel through time, killing monsters, solving people's problems, making the world a better place in the best way you can, and, you know, that's that. The game's also really linear, I've noticed. Like, I went around talking to everybody. There's, like, some very small side quests you can get here and there, and once you get near the end of the game, there are some very obvious side quests that it very much recommends you do, even if they are optional. They very much help you with being able to beat the game. Another thing I expected with JRPGs is tons of missable shit. So I played Final Fantasy VII about a year ago, and I missed so much shit. You know, Final Fantasy VII came out after Chrono Trigger, so it's not like it's as much of a classic as this game, or like Final Fantasy VI, or like other, you know, classic JRPGs of the 16-bit era. But I always, they're very intimidating to me because of how much very important, very powerful shit you can miss on your way through, and then you reach the final boss and it's like, oh my god, I'm not even getting close to beating this guy. What the hell did I do wrong here? Chrono Trigger doesn't have that, and it's so nice. There are some powerful items that you can get, but they are far from, mandatory to beat the game. If you miss them, you're not gonna be like, oh, I'm so weak, everything is harder now, what the fuck? I remember, when I got near the end of Final Fantasy VII, I actually only beat that game using, the cheats that are built into the Switch version. Though I do vow that one day I will go back and beat the game legitimately. I learned that, oh, here's this extremely powerful summon that you could use. But in order to get it, you need to do the stupid optional fucking chocobo raising minigame. I don't want to do that. And how was I supposed to know that the most fucking powerful spell in the game was hidden behind that? That's just such an archaic and, old way of game design that I'm always terrified of running into when playing these older games. People remember them great because you were probably, a kid when you played these games and you had that mentality of how games were back then. I grew up in the 2000s when we kind of moved away from that, so I'm not used to that. And Chrono Trigger not throwing that in your face is, it's one of the first things I want to mention, because I think, again, this is the only 16-bit era JRPG I've played. I do plan on playing more. I have Final Fantasy VI on the Game Boy Advance. I'd like to play Secret of Mana someday. This feels like a very good entry point, not only because of the simple plot, but also the fact that you don't need to worry about, doing tons of side quests that if you miss them, you're basically screwed. Or you need to grind for hours and hours, because there's not a lot of grind in this game either. As long as you just fight every enemy you encounter, then you're going to be pretty evenly leveled throughout the whole game, and you're not going to have too much struggle. You need to strategize, you need to think of the best party members to go into certain fights, you need to think of the best ways to efficiently use your moves, and sometimes you will die if you don't use the right strategy. But it doesn't require you to go back and fight a whole bunch of dudes to actually have a chance. All you need to do is think, and that is my favorite kind of game design, where just adding a little bit of thought and strategy to it makes the game go a lot smoother instead of having to go back and do some tedious grinding, which, this era was full of. And Chrono Trigger, kind of avoiding that, really makes it stand out, I think. And it feels like a great starting point, because I know from here, I'm probably going to start playing more harder, more difficult JRPGs that require a bit more exploration. But starting here, I'm very happy I did that, because it kind of puts my toe into this era of gaming that I've never really experienced before, and it makes me really excited to play the other ones from this time as well. Now, one thing I will say, just as a warning, this is not a spoiler, so don't worry about that. I'm not going to spoil too much of the game, at least the big points. There will be a point in the game where you can go and fight the final boss whenever you want. You get this opportunity far too early for how leveled you would be, but naturally, you're going to be tempted to, hey, I'm going to go give this a try, just see how far I get. But here's the thing about that. This is just a warning. When you go to fight the final boss, it's preceded by a boss rush of all of the main bosses that you fought along your journey. That's, again, pretty standard. The thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that these bosses have actually powered up from the first time you fought them. So you've gotten a lot stronger, but these bosses have not. So they're really easy, but just because of this awkward middle ground and level that you are, some of them do still take a little bit of time. So they have a lot of health, but neither of you do a lot of damage. The boss doesn't do a lot of damage to you, and you don't do a ton of damage to the boss. So it takes a little while. It took me to get through the boss rush and the fucking loading screens. Because again, before every boss, 5 seconds. After every boss, 5 seconds. It took me about a half hour to do all of that. And then I got to the boss itself, or at least its first phase, and I got my ass beat. So, I wasted 30 minutes of my life going through incredibly easy fights, only to reach a fight that I had no chance of winning. I hated that. That made me very upset. And this is just a warning. Once you get the chance to fight the final boss, don't do it. Don't do it yet. Go and explore more, and then go back and do it. Don't do it just for fun. You'll waste your time. And that was really goddamn annoying. It was probably, like, my least favorite part of the game. It was that. And I guess it was my fault because I knew I wasn't ready, but I kind of wish the game would have made it obvious to me a little bit sooner that I wasn't ready. Just so I didn't waste 30 minutes of my time. But again, it's the 90s. Like, they didn't take into account your time as much as they do these days. So it's just one of the small ways that Chrono Trigger has aged. Because of everything I said earlier, I do think the game has aged really well, but that part just was fucking stupid. So while we're actually talking about fighting, the combat, it was really interesting to me at first. So it's got the active battle system that I am familiar with from playing Final Fantasy VII. Side note, this isn't the game's fault, this is entirely me. But I think I've grown to hate this battle system. I much prefer just the standard turn-based style where you get your menu, you get a second to think about what you should do next, and you have all the time in the world to do it. That's how I prefer. For those unfamiliar, so here's how it works. Before you can move, you need to fill up this bar that fills up over time. Your speed stat, I believe, affects how quickly it fills up. And once it's filled up, you can enter a move. But if you take too long, then your move isn't skipped, but an enemy can move before you. That's how it goes. You need to move quickly if you want to get your attack off before the enemy attacks first. All that does for me is it increases my chance of misclicking, because I'm on a timer and I don't actually know how long the timer is because you can't see the little bar for the enemies. So I'm just like rushing as quickly as I can, and sometimes I'm going to hit the wrong thing. Or I'm going to fiddle around in the menus for too long, and like, if I'm scrolling through items, I'll scroll past the item, then I gotta go back up, and then, oh no, I missed it again, I gotta go back down a little bit. It's just stressful and irritating, and I think I've grown to really hate that battle system. I don't hate it to the point where I don't want to play games that have that battle style, or that this battle style greatly hindered my enjoyment of Chrono Trigger itself, but I just prefer the standard turn-based style, whatever. But that's not all that's unique with Chrono Trigger's battle system. One thing that's cool for the time is that when you run into an enemy, you fight them right there on the map. You're not transported to a special battle arena like you are in other games. You just do it right there on the map, which is cool. It's mostly an aesthetic thing. Frankly, if you were in a regular battle arena, it wouldn't make much difference, but it's cool. But because of this, what they take advantage of is you can do certain moves that kind of have an area of effect, and your positioning, as well as the positioning of the enemies, does matter, because there are some moves that hit in a circle, some moves that hit in a line, some moves that hit in an X pattern, and it's really interesting at first to kind of think of the enemy's positioning and kill them in a more efficient way. That's really cool. Problem is, eventually, all of your best attacks either attack one enemy for a gigantic amount of damage that is very useful, or your attacks hit all enemies regardless of their position. So eventually in the game, the AoE attacks that you have that were really interesting at first, they don't matter much. Like, you'll eventually stop using them. Because not only that, eventually, like, when you get to the stronger enemies and like mini bosses and boss fights, all the enemies are spread out in such a way and they don't move, so your AoE attacks are pretty useless, and you yourself cannot move or choose your positioning on the battlefield either, so you can't strategize there. I think that might have been too much for games at the time to implement, so it's not like I can blame them there. But eventually those moves do become obsolete, and this potentially really cool mechanic kind of just gets pushed to the wayside, and that ended up disappointing me. Instead, what steals the show are the techniques. So these are basically your spells. There are some actual spells, and then there's some techniques, or techs, as the game calls them, that are not technically spells, but they use magic and special abilities and stuff, so they may as well be. So there's two different kinds of experience. There's your regular experience, which levels you up and increases your stats, and then you get tech points, which will, once you get a certain amount, you get a new ability. So you get a whole bunch throughout the game, but not only that, if you battle with certain partners, you get team techs, or dual techs, or triple techs, that allow you to combine forces to do a super powerful attack that ends up using only a little bit of your MP per character. Instead of using one character with a super powerful move, for example, that uses 20 of your 80 MP, you can instead do a dual tech with yourself and another party member that does a ton of damage, but maybe only uses 3 to 5 MP per person. So the only downside is both parties need to have that full time bar. They need to both be ready at the same time to do an attack. So sometimes you're going to be waiting for your partner to become ready to attack, and that leaves you vulnerable. So that is actually, you know what? No, I didn't really think about that before saying that. That is a very good justification for the active battle system, because there's that risk and reward versus, should I just use this single attack to get some damage out because I think this enemy's really close to death, and use a shitload of MP, or should I wait, do a more powerful attack that uses less MP, and maybe does more damage, and leave myself open to attack a bit more, or open for the enemy to heal themselves. That's some really great strategy, and I think that's the shiningest part of Chrono Trigger's combat. It's so cool, and now that I've played some more recent games like Persona 5 Royal or Dragon Quest XI, you can see the influence there with Persona 5 Royal's Showtime attacks or Dragon Quest XI's pep powers. Except those you need to have a certain power-up or a certain random event to activate. In this, you could do them whenever you want as long as both party members are ready and you know the right move and have enough MP. This is so cool, and I want to play more games with techniques like this. If there are any, this game was influential enough, I'd be shocked if there was not another game with a similar mechanic to this. Let me know in the comments. I would love to play a game like that again. Alright, so I've gone over all my bullet points here, except for two, and they're kind of out of order. But first, I want to talk about the music. It almost feels cliche to say, "Wowie G!" Insert Super Nintendo JRPG here. Has like one of the best soundtracks ever. But Chrono Trigger has one of the best soundtracks ever. I can't. It's so good. It's so good. This is some of the best 16-bit tunage that you will hear. In fact, it's so good, you've been hearing it in the background for this whole video, but I want to just point out a few tracks that I really like. And you know what's great? Nintendo, it's the soundtrack's on Spotify. It's the DS version. It sounds like the same. Like, it may be produced a little bit differently. Honestly, I think it could probably sound better. But it's on Spotify. And let me point out a few songs that I really, really enjoyed and play a few seconds of them. Oh, God. I kind of just want to go over every song, but this playlist has 78 tracks, so I don't think I can do that. So let's start a little bit up-tempo here. This is the standard theme that you're going to hear during boss fights. Here you go. This one is really weird. This is like a caveman party song. You actually hear it really early in the game, like at this festival that you start the game at, where it's like a celebration of like ancient civilizations. It's this really weird song. It's called Burn Bobonga. This next one it's a good contender for like my favorite song in the game. It is the theme song for the dungeon called Tyranno Castle, or Spotify calls it Tyran Castle. I think that might just be a change in the DS translation, but here it is. It sounds like something out of Doom, and it's awesome. This next one is a song that you hear in a pretty late game dungeon. I'm gonna go ahead and avoid saying what it's called because it's a very important part of the game, but this song is incredible. Check it out. Finally, I would like to play the theme song for a character named Robo. I was advised recently that this sounds a lot like Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley. And once you have that pointed out to you, you cannot unhear it. So, I'm sorry, and you're welcome. So yeah, music, amazing. Like, you heard it. I hope you liked it too, otherwise I look like a dink. But I fucking, who's gonna say like Chrono Trigger has shitty music? Like, I don't care. It's great. Incredible soundtrack. You know, I don't think you needed to be told that. It's so good. And weird thing to end off on, because I kind of went off on a few tangents, but the characters. The characters are not terribly in-depth, and that's fine. They're all charming, and that's what matters. You have a few side characters that are really important to the story that you end up either liking or really not liking, but your party members are great too. Much like Dragon Quest, Akira Toriyama of Dragon Ball fame did the art. It's very obvious. You can see, like, not only in the, of course, character art that you see on, like, the cover of the box or in character portraits on the main menus, but you also see bits of his, like, influence on the sprites as well, with how they emote, which they emote quite a bit. They're really expressive for being such small sprites. They're expressive, they're detailed, and I really like them a lot. So as for the characters themselves, Chrono, you know, plank of wood JRPG protagonist, he's got bits and pieces of personality here and there, but you know, there's just not much to him. He's one of those, like, he's not a chosen one. He was just kind of in the right place in the right time and has the right heart to want to change the world and stuff. It's like, he's not terribly interesting on his own. Then you got Marley, who is a sweet girl. She I guess, is the love interest of the game. I mean, that with these old games, you could kind of tell right off the bat that that's the case, but it doesn't really play much into anything. The fact that you two are, like, destined to be together or whatever. She's nice. Again, the characters aren't deep, so I actually don't have a lot to say about most of them. You got Luca, who I really like her design in her sprite. I think her sprite design makes her look more interesting than her actual, like, full art design. Because, like, her sprite makes her look like this, like, lanky goober. And she is a goober, but, I mean, I don't know. Something about her design and her sprite makes, I think, looks more appealing than her official design, where she just kind of looks like a, you know, she kind of looks like Bulma. You got Frog, who's a frog with a sword, and he's great. I love him. He speaks, at least in the Super Nintendo and PlayStation version, and with, like, this, like, ye olde, like, English style, like, he says eth and stuff. That apparently was just totally a thing for this translation. He talked like a normal dude in the Japanese version, and for the DS and mobile/Steam versions, he just talks like a normal dude too, apparently. I like the ye olde thing. I think it's cute. It does not bother me at all, even though it's strange. And then you got, okay, is it Isla or Ayla? I say Isla. I have an OC named Isla, so, but some people say Ayla. I feel like no one will get on your case for saying one way or the other. Who is a cave woman, and she rocks. She's very abrasive. She talk like this. Isla talk like old cave lady. you know, with that caveman, like, simple English talk. And it's kind of funny. I really, like, it's always a treat to read Isla's dialogue out loud. She's very strong-headed. She's very thick. And she's very pretty. You know, it's amazing how, like, despite being from 65 million years in the past, they've already adopted these, like, modern human evolutions and, you know, do things like shave their legs and speak English and sell things. Again, Chrono Trigger doesn't give a shit. You really shouldn't either. I totally skipped by Robo. Poor Robo. He probably has the saddest story, in my opinion. No, Frog does too. There's some sad stories in this. Like, this is one of those games where there is just enough character development to make you give a shit. But not much more than that. Robo's got some sad stuff to him, and he's really nice. He's a robot. He's a yellow robot. Luca fixed him up when you go to the future, and he's nice. He's a good boy, and he helps you out, and he's got a lot of good moves. Very, very good boy. So did I love Chrono Trigger? Yeah, Chrono Trigger was a great time. I'm not entirely sure I loved it as much as, you know, some people do, but I had a really great time playing it. The game started off really good, and then about halfway through, it started getting really great. Like, I would say it has a slow burn, but that's not even true, because that implies that you need to slog through some unfun stuff to get to the really good stuff. No, the game is fun from beginning to end. It's just that after a point, that fun is just, like, evolved that extra bit more. So I had a really great time playing this game. I could definitely see why it is an all-time classic. And again, this, like I said earlier, if you want to get into 16-bit classic JRPGs from this era, I mean, this is my first one, so the jury is technically still out. But this does feel like a really good entry point. I've heard a lot about Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, how this was meant to be an entry-level point for people to get into JRPGs, and it was designed that way. And people don't really like that game, because it seems to be designed in a way that it makes the player feel like an idiot. Like, they are underestimating the intelligence of their player by making the game so simple and making the plot so nothing. Chrono Trigger feels like a much better way to do that. The plot's simple, the characters are good, the game is not extraordinarily difficult or brutal or grindy, and it's not filled with missable items that you're going to be directly punished for not exploring every nook and cranny and spending tons of time in a bunch of stupid fucking minigames. This feels like an excellent starting point for my journey at trying other JRPGs. And I am extremely glad that I finally got to play this game, even with the awful load times, like the extraordinarily hampering load times of the PlayStation version. I still wound up having a fantastic time, and I think that's a testament to just how good this game is. And if you haven't played it yet, and you like RPGs, give it a go. It's great. So that's Chrono Trigger, another absolute classic that I missed out on off the list. And I feel like I'm going to run into a lot more of them, because here soon I'm going to be starting a Final Fantasy marathon. I'm going to start playing Final Fantasy games and quit when I get sick of it, because I realized I've amassed like a sizable Final Fantasy collection, because Final Fantasy seems to be for people who like JRPGs but don't have money, because all the games are so cheap. However, that is technically on the back burner for a little while longer, because I kind of got distracted with Pokemon Shining Pearl, a game that I'm liking a lot more than I was expecting to. So I'm going to beat that game first, and then I'm going to start my Final Fantasy marathon. I'm going to start with Final Fantasy X. So you could probably expect a video about Pokemon Shining Pearl, actually. I've got a lot to say about it. But hopefully I can also do one about Final Fantasy X once I finish that. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you like Chrono Trigger, and I hope if you haven't played it yet, give it a try. Really great game. I'm sure that even the Steam version, if you can get over the terrible UI, I'm sure that's a good way to play it. It's cheap, and it's probably the most accessible. So yeah, give it a go. Don't spend $250 on the cartridge, please. At least don't buy it from some don't buy it from some schmuck on eBay. Like, if you do that, at least support a small business. Support a local GameStop if you're gonna do that. Anyway, bye.